Commander Nathan Cole stood at the large window of the space station called Horizon's Edge and watched the alien ship move slowly toward them through the darkness of space. He was 42 years old and had spent 20 years serving humanity. In the stars, he had fought in 3 wars between different species and had helped make peace with aliens who thought humans were nothing more than clever animals, but nothing in his past had prepared him for what was about to happen. Ambassador Linda Grant walked up beside him and looked out at the approaching ship. Vessel belonged to the Volanthi, and it was beautiful in a way that made human. Ships look like toys built by children. The Volanthi High Council is sending their youngest daughter, Linda said quietly. Her name is Princess Thera Valcarenti, and she is 19 cycles old, which is about 19 Earth years. Nathan frowned at this information. They are sending a teenager to handle first contact negotiations with humanity? Do not let her age fool you, Linda replied. The Volanthi mature differently than we do, and she already holds 3 advanced degrees by our standards and commands her own fleet of research vessels. Then why do you sound worried? Linda hesitated before answering. Intelligence reports say she has very strong opinions about younger species like ours, and she has publicly stated that humans are aggressive primitives who stumbled into space travel by accident and will probably destroy ourselves. Within 200 years, Nathan absorbed this information without showing any emotion on his face. He had heard worse things said about humanity before. What does she want from us? He asked. Access to the Keth Nebula, Linda explained. It sits in neutral space, but our mining operations control the only safe passage through that region, and the Volanthi need rare minerals that can only be found there. So they need something from us. Desperately, Linda confirmed. Their entire homeworld depends on those minerals for power, and they have maybe 50 years before they face critical shortages. Nathan turned away from the window. Then let us go welcome our guest and see what kind of person she really is. The docking bay had been transformed into a showcase of everything humanity had achieved. Holographic displays covered the wall showing Earth's history and art and music and scientific discoveries. The delegation waiting to greet the princess included scientists and artists and cultural representatives who had been chosen to demonstrate that humans were more than just primitive warriors. The Volanthi ship connected to the station with a soft sound, and the airlock doors slid open. Princess Thera Valcarenti descended from her vessel, surrounded by 8 guards wearing flowing silver armor that seemed to shimmer like water. She was tall and stood perhaps 7 feet in height, with luminous purple skin that seemed to glow from within. Her eyes shifted between gold and silver as she looked around, and her gown appeared to be woven from starlight itself. By any measure, she was one of the most beautiful beings Nathan had ever seen. She looked upon everything around her with obvious contempt. Nathan stepped forward and offered a formal bow, as he had been trained to do. Your Highness, he said in a calm and respectful voice. On behalf of the United Earth Federation, I welcome you to Horizon's Edge, and I am Commander Nathan Cole, and I have been appointed as your liaison. During these negotiations, Tyra's silver eyes swept over him like he was a piece of furniture not worth noticing. You are the one they have chosen to speak with me? Her translator device rendered her words in a voice that was melodic but cold. I expected someone of higher status. I hold the highest diplomatic rank available for this mission. Your Highness, rank among humans. She said the words the way someone might say rank among insects. I have reviewed your species' history, Commander, and what I found was not impressive. She began to walk forward, and Nathan fell into step beside her as she continued speaking. 4,000 years of recorded civilization, and you have spent 3,000 of them killing each other over territory and resources and ideology, and your greatest technological advances came from building weapons, and you achieved space travel not through enlightenment but through a race to build better missiles. The human delegation shifted uncomfortably behind them, but Nathan simply listened without responding. My advisors questioned why I would lower myself to negotiate with a species so clearly beneath the galactic standard. Thura continued, but I told them that even primitive creatures can occasionally prove useful, and your kind controls the passage we require, and that is the only reason I'm standing here. I understand, Your Highness, Nathan said calmly. If you will follow me, we have prepared quarters that should be suitable for your delegation. Thyra's eyes narrowed slightly, and she seemed surprised by his lack of reaction to her insults. See that the quarters meet Volante's standards, she commanded. I will not tolerate human incompetence. Of course, Your Highness, as Nathan led the delegation. Through the corridors of the station, Thyra continued her commentary on everything she saw. He criticized the architecture as clumsy and unrefined. She complained that the lighting was too harsh for civilized eyes. She declared the air filtration system to be primitive and barely functional when they passed the cultural displays showing human art and music and literature. She laughed out loud. This is what you consider art? She asked while pointing at a painting that hung on the wall. A child on my world could create something better, and your music is nothing but noise without structure or meaning. Nathan said nothing. He simply walked and listened and let her speak. When they reached the quarters that had been prepared for the Volante delegation, Thyra walked inside and looked around with disgust on her beautiful face. This will have to do, I suppose, she said, though I expected better from a species trying to impress their superiors. We have done our best, Your Highness, Nathan replied. If there is anything else you require, please let me know, and I will see that it is provided. Thara turned to face him and studied his expression with curiosity. You do not react to anything I say, she observed. Most humans I have encountered become angry or defensive when I speak the truth about their species. The truth is the truth, Your Highness, Nathan said. Getting angry about it would not change anything. How refreshingly practical. Thyra smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Perhaps you're slightly more intelligent than the average human, though that is not saying much. Thank you, Your Highness. Nathan gave another small bow. The formal dinner will begin in 3 hours, and I will return to escort you when it is time. He turned and walked out of the room without waiting for her. Response in the corridor, Linda Grant was waiting for him with worry written all over her face. That was brutal, she whispered. How did you stay so calm? Nathan looked back at the closed door. She is testing us, and she wants to see how we react to her provocations. And if we lose our temper, she will use it as proof that humans are the emotional primitives she believes us to be. So what do? We give her nothing to use against losers, Nathan said. We remain professional and courteous no matter what she says, and eventually she will have to deal with us as we actually are, instead of as she imagines us to be. Linda did not look convinced, but she nodded. I hope you know what you are doing, Nathan. So do I, he admitted quietly. So do I. Over the next 3 days, Princess Thyra made her hatred for humanity absolutely clear to everyone on the station. During the opening ceremonial dinner, she refused to eat any food that had been prepared by human hands. It is likely contaminated, she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. I do not trust primitive species to understand proper hygiene. The human chefs who had spent weeks preparing the meal stood in humiliated silence as their work was rejected without even being tasted. When the human delegation presented gifts representing the finest craftsmanship Earth had to offer, Thyra had them taken away without even looking at them. Put them in storage somewhere, she told her guards. Primitive artifacts hold no interest for me, and I have no use for trinkets made by lesser beings. A sculptor who had spent 2 years creating a piece specifically for this occasion watched his life's work being carried away like garbage in the formal negotiation sessions that followed. Thyra refused to speak directly to any human representative. Instead, she spoke only to her own advisors and treated the humans in the room as servants who existed only to deliver messages. Tell the humans that their proposal is inadequate. She would say to her advisor, who would then repeat the words to Nathan, even though he was sitting right there and had heard everything perfectly well. Through all of this, Commander Nathan Cole remained perfectly composed. He answered every demand promptly and professionally. He addressed every concern with patience and courtesy, and he never once rose to any of her provocations, no matter how insulting they became. On the fourth day of negotiations, Thyra summoned Nathan to her private quarters. He arrived exactly on time and found her standing before a holographic display that showed complex chemical formulas and mineral compositions. "Commander Cole," she said, without looking away from the display, "I have noticed something peculiar about you over these past few days, Your Highness." "You do not react." She finally turned to face him, and her silver eyes studied him with genuine curiosity. "My behavior should have provoked anger or defensiveness, or at least some attempt to win my approval. And your species is notorious for emotional instability. Yet, you respond to nothing I do. I respond to what matters, Your Highness. And my observations about your species do not matter to you." Nathan considered his words carefully before answering. "Your observations are your own, Your Highness, and you have every right to hold whatever opinions you choose, and my task here is to help these negotiations succeed, not to change your personal views about humanity." Thyra tilted her head slightly as she processed this response. "A very diplomatic answer, Commander, but surely you have personal feelings about being called primitive, and surely it bothers you to have your entire civilization dismissed as barbaric." "I have feelings, Your Highness. But feelings are not facts, and facts are what these negotiations require." "Then let me present you with a fact." Thyra waved her hand, and the holographic display changed to show an enormous space station that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. "This is the Volanti archive of galactic history, and it contains records spanning 18 million years and every species that has ever achieved space. Travel is documented there, including their achievements and their failures and their ultimate fates." Nathan watched the display without comment. "Do you know what the archive says about humanity?" Thyra asked with a cold smile. "Nothing of significance, and your species was given exactly 3 paragraphs in the preliminary assessment section. And the summary describes you as aggressive primates with technological potential, limited by psychological instability, and a projected lifespan as a spacefaring civilization of 200 to 400 years, before inevitable self-destruction. That is an interesting assessment, Your Highness." "Interesting?" Thyra's composure cracked slightly, and surprise flickered across her features. "Your entire species has been judged and found worthless by 18 million years of accumulated wisdom, and you find it merely interesting?" "I find it a prediction, Your Highness, and predictions can be wrong. Volanti predictions are never wrong." Nathan allowed himself a small smile. "Then I suppose humanity will have to be the first exception." That evening, Nathan received an urgent message from Earth containing the official Volanti proposal. He read through it 3 times to make sure he understood everything correctly. The Volanti were offering technological exchanges in medicine and environmental restoration and agriculture technologies that could cure half the diseases that still plagued humanity, technologies that could reverse centuries of damage humans had done to their own planet, technologies that could end hunger on Earth forever. It was by any objective measure the most generous offer any alien species had ever made to humanity. But attached to the offer were conditions that made Nathan's stomach turn cold. Humans would be required to submit to Volanti oversight of all space exploration programs. Any expansion of human territory beyond current borders would require Volanti approval. All human military vessels would be limited in both number and capability according to specifications set by the Volanti. Linda Grant arrived at his quarters shortly after he finished reading. "They are offering us paradise," she said quietly, "but the price is our freedom." "They want us to become a client species," Nathan replied, "protected and provided for and permanently inferior. The leadership back on Earth is divided on how to respond, and some say we should accept because the benefits are too great to refuse, and others say we should reject it entirely because the conditions are unacceptable. Nathan set down the tablet containing the proposal. What is the timeline? They want an answer within 30 standard days, and Princess Thyra has been authorized to negotiate specific details, but the core structure of the agreement is non-negotiable. Non-negotiable, Nathan repeated the word slowly. She came here expecting us to accept whatever scraps she decided to offer, because she believes we are incapable of understanding our own value. Can you blame her, Nathan? Linda asked. By Volanti standards, we really are children, playing with dangerous toys, and they have watched hundreds of species rise and fall over millions of years, and from their perspective, they are offering to protect us from ourselves. Protection that comes with a leash around our necks. Linda nodded. Slowly, the question is whether we have any way to change the terms. Nathan stood and walked to the window, where he could see the stars burning in the endless darkness. Somewhere out there, human ships were exploring new worlds and human colonies. We're growing and human dreams were reaching toward infinity. We have one advantage, he said finally. They need those minerals desperately, and everything else in their offer is optional, but that need is real and urgent. So what do we do? Nathan stared out at the stars for a long moment before answering. We find out how badly they really need what we have, and whether Princess Thyra understands that she is not negotiating from a position of strength. And if she does not understand, Nathan turned away from the window, and his expression was calm, but his eyes held something hard and determined. Then we will have to teach her. The next formal negotiation session began exactly like all the others had begun. Princess Thyra entered the conference chamber surrounded by her advisors and guards, and took her seat at the head of the table without acknowledging any of the humans present. She spent several minutes reviewing documents on her personal display, while everyone waited in uncomfortable silence. Finally, she looked up, and her silver eyes swept across the human delegation with the same contempt she had shown from the very first moment of her arrival. Nathan waited until she seemed ready to listen before he spoke. Your Highness, we have reviewed your proposal in detail and discussed it thoroughly with our leadership on Earth. And you accept, of course. Thyra did not phrase it as a question, because in her mind there was no possibility of any other answer. The benefits to your species are overwhelming, and only a fool would refuse what we are offering. We have concerns about certain conditions included in the proposal. Thyra's eyes flickered with annoyance. Your concerns are irrelevant, Commander, and the terms we have offered are standard for client species. Integration and your civilization will benefit enormously from Volanti guidance. Client species. Nathan repeated the words carefully and let them hang in the air for a moment. Your Highness, we did not come to these negotiations seeking to be adopted into the Volanti Empire, and we came seeking fair trade between equals. The Volanti advisors exchanged surprised glances with each other. Thyra's expression shifted from annoyance to cold amusement. Equals? She laughed, and the sound rang through the conference chamber like shattering glass. Commander Cole, surely you understand what that word actually means, and the Volanti have guided galactic civilization for 18 million years, while your species only discovered fire approximately 400,000 years ago, and the concept of equality between us is not merely incorrect, it is completely absurd. Nathan said nothing in response. He simply sat there and looked at her with calm, steady eyes. Your people have possessed faster than light travel for less than 3 centuries. Thyra continued, and her voice grew sharper with each word. And in that time you have fought 4 major wars among yourselves and destroyed 2 of your own colony worlds through carelessness and nearly made your home planet uninhabitable through pollution and environmental destruction. She leaned forward, and her starlight gown shimmered with the movement. You are children. Commander Cole, and not just children, but violent and unstable children who happen to find a very dangerous weapon, and now you play with forces you do not understand, and pretend you deserve a place among civilized species. The human delegation sat in painful silence. Linda Grant's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. "The terms we have offered are generous," Thyra declared. "Far more generous than any species as young and primitive as yours actually deserves. And we are offering you advanced medicine and miraculous technology and protection from your own destructive impulses." She spread her hands in a gesture that was meant to appear magnanimous. "In return, we ask only that you accept guidance from those who possess actual wisdom, and that you acknowledge your proper place in the order of galactic civilization, and that you stop pretending to be something you are clearly not." She paused and fixed Nathan with her cold silver stare. "Now accept the proposal, and let us complete this tedious business so I can return to more important matters." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. His expression remained completely calm and completely neutral. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but every word carried clearly through the silent chamber. "No." That single word seemed to echo off the walls. Thyra's expression flickered with something that might have been shock. "No?" Her voice rose slightly. "You refuse technologies that could save millions of human lives, and you refuse advancements that would take your species centuries to achieve on their own, and you do this out of what exactly? Wounded pride? Foolish stubbornness?" Nathan stood up slowly from his chair. "I refuse terms that require humanity to surrender our right to determine our own future." He picked up his tablet and the documents his team had prepared. "Your Highness, you came to this station because your people need something that we control, and you have spent 4 days insulting my species and my civilization and every single person in this delegation, and you have called us primitive and unstable and unworthy of basic respect." He straightened his uniform and continued speaking in that same calm, quiet voice. "We have listened to every insult with patience, and we have responded to every demand with professionalism, and we have shown you nothing but courtesy despite the contempt you have shown us." Thera opened her mouth to respond, but Nathan kept speaking. "You believe we are children, and perhaps by your ancient standards, we are. But children grow, Your Highness, and they learn, and they become more than their elders ever expected. And sometimes they surpass those who once looked down upon them." He turned and walked toward the door. "Commander Cole." Thyra's voice carried an edge of warning now. "If you walk out of this negotiation, you walk away from everything we have offered. And your people will lose access to medical advances and technological miracles and the protection of the greatest civilization in the galaxy." Nathan stopped at the door. He did not turn around. "We have struggled alone since we first climbed down from the trees, Your Highness, and we have faced extinction and catastrophe and our own worst impulses, and we have survived every challenge, and we have grown stronger, and we have reached the stars without your guidance or your permission." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was very soft. "You came here needing something from us, and you offered insults instead of respect, and you demanded submission instead of partnership." He opened the door. "Now you will have neither the minerals nor the alliance you were seeking, and goodbye, Your Highness, and I hope your people find another solution to their energy crisis, because you will not find it here." And then he walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft sound that seemed very loud in the absolute silence of the conference chamber. No one moved. No one spoke. Princess Thora sat frozen in her chair, staring at the closed door with an expression that no one in the room could quite read. For the first time since she had arrived on the station, she had absolutely nothing to say. 3 days passed after Nathan walked out of the negotiation chamber, and in that time Princess Thyra did not leave her quarters even once. She communicated only with her own advisors and refused all requests for meetings from the human delegation. The Entire stations seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Nathan spent those 3 days doing his normal work and reviewing reports and answering routine messages and keeping the station running smoothly. He did not talk about what had happened in the conference chamber. He did not express doubt or regret about his decision. He simply continued doing his job as if nothing unusual had occurred. Linda Grant found him in the observation lounge on the third evening, standing at the window and watching the stars, as he often did when he needed to think. "The Volante cruiser is preparing to leave," she said quietly. "They have filed official flight plans back to their home system." Nathan nodded, but did not turn away from the window. "You know what this means," Linda continued. "We have lost access to medical technology that could have cured half the diseases still killing people on Earth, and we have lost environmental restoration science that could have fixed centuries of damage to our planet, and we have lost agricultural advances that could have ended hunger forever." "Yes, I know." Linda walked closer and stood beside him. "Do you regret what you did?" Nathan thought about the question for a long moment before answering. "I regret that we could not find a way to work together, and I regret that she gave us no choice but to refuse. But I do not regret rejecting terms that would have made humanity less than what we are. Some people will say that you let pride cost us everything. Some people will say that, and they might even be right." He finally turned to face her, and his expression was serious but calm. "But Linda, what would we have become if we had accepted, and we would have been a protected species, guided and controlled by people who thought we were inferior, and every achievement we made would have been credited to Volante wisdom, and every mistake would have confirmed their belief that we were too primitive to govern ourselves, and in 100 years would there have been anything truly human left?" Before Linda could answer, a communication alert sounded through the lounge. The face of the station's communication officer appeared on a nearby display screen. "Commander Cole, we are receiving a transmission from the Volante cruiser and Princess Thyra is requesting a private meeting with you." Nathan and Linda exchanged surprised glances. "Tell her I will meet her in Observation Lounge 7. Nathan said after a moment. "And tell her I will come alone." When Princess Thyra entered the observation lounge 30 minutes later, she looked different than she had before. She was not diminished exactly, but something about her seemed less certain and less arrogant than the princess who had arrived on the station 4 days earlier. Her elaborate starlight gown had been replaced with simple clothing, and she had come without guards or advisors. She was completely alone. She stood in the doorway for a moment, studying Nathan as he gazed out at the stars. "Commander Cole, Your Highness." She walked slowly toward the window and stopped a few feet away from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I have spent the last 3 days reviewing records," Thyra finally said, and her voice was softer now, with none of the cold contempt it had carried before. "Not the official assessments in the archive, but the raw data and the unprocessed observations our monitoring stations have gathered about your species over the past 3 centuries. Nathan waited for her to continue. "Do you know what I found?" She turned to look at him, and something complicated moved behind her silver eyes. "I found a species that came within moments of destroying itself with nuclear weapons, and then chose to disarm rather than risk extinction." She paused and took a breath before continuing. "I found a species that poisoned its own atmosphere and oceans, and then somehow managed to unite across political divisions to reverse the damage, and I found a species that carries the capacity for terrible violence, yet builds hospitals and schools and museums alongside its weapons." Nathan said nothing, but he was listening intently to every word. "I found contradictions that I cannot explain," Thyra continued. "Cruelty and compassion existing within the same individuals, and destruction and creation driven by the same impulses, and a species that should have destroyed itself 12 times over yet somehow keeps choosing to survive. We are what we are, Your Highness." What? You are something the Volanti have never encountered before. She turned to face him fully, and her expression held something that looked almost like wonder. We have watched thousands of species rise and fall over millions of years, and most of them were predictable and consistent, and the violent ones destroyed themselves, and the peaceful ones were conquered, and the ambitious ones overreached, and each species had a single defining characteristic that determined its eventual fate. And humanity? Humanity has all of those characteristics at once. Her silver eyes were wide now as she struggled to put her thoughts into words. You are violent and peaceful at the same time, and destructive and creative in equal measure, and ambitious, yet capable of humility, and you contain the seeds of every possible future within yourselves. And somehow, you keep choosing to move forward despite all your flaws. Nathan remained silent, letting her speak. I came here believing I understood your species completely, and I had read all the assessments and reviewed all the predictions, and I knew that humanity was nothing more than aggressive primitives playing with dangerous technology, and I knew you were just a brief flash in galactic history before your inevitable self-destruction. She paused, and the silence stretched between them. I was wrong. Wrong about which part? About everything. She moved closer to the window and stood beside him now, looking out at the same stars. I was wrong to dismiss you, and wrong to assume the Volanti way was the only path to survival, and wrong to believe that any species could be truly understood through statistics and predictions alone. She turned her head to look at him when you walked out. Of that negotiation, I felt something I have not felt in many years, and it was shame, and not because you rejected our offer, but because I realized I had given you no reason to accept it, and I had offered paradise with chains attached and expected you to be grateful. Humanity is not a species that wears chains well. No. A small smile crossed her face, and for the first time it held genuine warmth. No, I am beginning to understand that very clearly. The formal renegotiation took place 1 week after Nathan had walked out of the original meeting. Princess Thyra entered the conference chamber without guards and without advisors and without the elaborate starlight gown she had worn before. She wore simple clothing, and when she looked at the human delegation, her eyes held respect instead of contempt. I have communicated with the Volanti High Council, she began as she took her seat, and I explained to them that my initial approach to these negotiations was deeply flawed, and that my assumptions about humanity were incorrect, and that the terms we originally proposed were unacceptable. The human delegation listened in careful silence. The High Council was not pleased with what I told them, Thura continued. They reminded me that the Volanti do not negotiate as equals with younger species, and they said that our traditions and protocols exist for good reasons, and they told me that my behavior was unprecedented and perhaps inappropriate. She paused, and something in her expression hardened with determination. I told them that perhaps our traditions needed to be examined more carefully, and I said that 80 million years of doing things one way did not guarantee that way was correct, and I told them that I had encountered something in humanity that all our assessments had completely failed to capture. Nathan leaned forward slightly in his chair. How did the council respond to that? With shock, mostly. Thyra admitted, no member of the royal family has ever questioned Volanti protocols so directly before, and my mother, the Empress, demanded to know what had happened to change my thinking so completely. What did you tell her? Thyra met his eyes and held his gaze steadily. I told her that a human had walked away from everything we offered rather than accept terms that would compromise his species and their dignity. And I told her that he had chosen struggle and uncertainty over comfort and submission. And I told her that in that single act, he had demonstrated something that 18 million years of Volanti civilization had never produced. The conference chamber was utterly silent as everyone waited for her to continue. I told My mother that humanity possessed something we had lost somewhere along the way, and that something was the willingness to risk everything for the right to determine your own future. She paused and a small smile crossed her features. My mother said nothing for a very long time after I finished speaking, and then she authorized me to negotiate new terms with humanity and terms between equals. The negotiations that followed took 3 months to complete. The final agreement was unlike anything the Volanti had ever signed with another species. Humanity would grant the Volanti passage rights through the Keth Nebula in exchange for technology sharing programs that would be conducted as joint ventures rather than one-way transfers. Human scientists would work alongside Volanti researchers as partners. Human perspectives would be considered in the development process. Human innovations would be welcomed and studied rather than dismissed. There would be no oversight of human expansion into space. There would be no limits placed on human military capability. There would be no client species integration. Instead, there would be a true partnership between two civilizations. It would be complicated and challenging and completely unprecedented. In galactic history, two species with vastly different histories had agreed to face the future together as allies rather than as guardian and wardon. The day of the formal signing ceremony, Princess Thera found Nathan in Observation Lounge 7, where he stood watching the stars as he always did. Commander Cole. She walked across the room and stood beside him at the window. I find myself uncertain how to express what I wish to say to you. Take your time, Your Highness. My people have guided younger species for 18 million years, and we believed we understood everything about the path to galactic survival, and we believed our wisdom was complete and perfect. She turned to face him directly. You showed me that wisdom which cannot grow and change is not truly wisdom at all, and it is merely tradition disguised as truth. Nathan shook his head slowly. I did not show you anything. Your Highness and I simply walked out of a room. You let silence judge me. Thera smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face, and that silence delivered a verdict I could not ignore. And in refusing to argue and refusing to defend your worth, you demonstrated it more clearly than any words ever could have. What happens now for you? Nathan asked, when you return home, I return to my homeworld as the princess who dared to question 18 million years of tradition, and some will consider me a hero for what I have done, and others will consider me a fool, and my mother is still deciding which category she herself falls into. And which category do you fall into? Thera considered the question carefully before answering. I believe I am someone who learns something unexpected and important about herself, and I came here absolutely certain of my superiority, and I leave here uncertain about many things I once considered to be absolute truths. She paused and looked out at the stars. That uncertainty feels uncomfortable, but it also feels honest. She extended her hand to him in the human gesture of farewell that she had learned during her time on the station. Thank you, Commander Cole, for your patience, and for your silence, and for walking away when doing so must have been terrifying. Nathan took her hand. It was not terrifying, Your Highness, and it was simply necessary. How did you know it would work? Nathan smiled. I did not know, and I simply decided that if humanity was going to fail, we would fail on our own terms, rather than succeed on terms set by someone else, and everything that happened after that was entirely up to you. That was a tremendous gamble. We are a species of gamblers, Your Highness, and it is one of our less predictable qualities. Thera laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine and filled with something that sounded very much like hope. Then perhaps that unpredictability is exactly what the galaxy needs right now, and the Volanti have been too certain of ourselves for far too long, and certainty breeds stagnation. She released his hand and walked toward the door, but stopped at the threshold and turned back to look at him one final time. You humans with your contradictions and your stubbornness and your absolute refusal to accept limits imposed by others may accomplish things we Volanti cannot even imagine. I think I am very glad that we will be there to witness whatever comes next. I will see you again, Your Highness. Yes, Commander Cole, you certainly will. And then she was gone, and Nathan stood alone with the stars. He watched through the window as the Volante cruiser undocked from the station and drifted away into the infinite darkness. Somewhere out there, two civilizations were beginning a new chapter in galactic history, a chapter that had started with insults and silence and ended with something neither side had expected to find, something that looked very much like hope. And Nathan Cole smiled as he watched the stars and thought about all the impossible things that humans had achieved simply by refusing to accept that they were impossible. The galaxy was vast and old and full of ancient wisdom, but humanity was young and stubborn and absolutely unwilling to be told what they could not become, and that made all the difference. The end.